Well, hello everybody. I hope you're enjoying this fine Saturday morning. My name is Darwins Olcima. I'm a graduate student here at BGSU in the College Student Personnel Program.
And hi, everybody. My name is Conor McLaughlin. I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Higher Education and Student Affairs.
And today we're going to be talking to you a little bit about leadership and how to lead within yourself. So just to go over quickly our agenda for today, we're going to kind of review leadership identity for a little bit and the whole development process. We're going to go over our experience for leadership. And then we're also going to discuss with you all what your ideas around peer leadership and your leadership identity is. And then we're going to close out with some reflection and connections, everything we kind of go over with today.
Awesome. So in order to start the framing of our presentation, it was important to us that we acknowledge that the land that we are on at the moment and the land that Bowling Green State University occupies is the unceded territory of the Kickapoo, Peoria, and Miami people who were forcibly displaced from their land by the U.S. government's Indian Removal Act. And we recognize that our presence on this land is a consequence of colonization, forced displacement, and genocide of the indigenous people of this land. And we honor and respect the many people and diverse tribal nations who are still connected to the land and who still live here. We believe that this is a necessary part of the work of decolonizing education and leadership, the kind of change towards which all leadership, we believe, is oriented. And that is sort of a part of laying the foundation of how we come to the work of understanding leadership, understanding ourselves, and understanding what our place in practicing leadership is. We also wanted to tell you a little bit more about who we are in introducing ourselves to you.
All right, everybody. So like I said, I'm Darwins. I use he, him, his pronouns. And a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a graduate student here in the College Student Personnel Program, but I'm originally from Florida. So I went to the University of Central Florida. And so a lot of times when people ask me, Darwins, why'd you come to BG? And I'm like, oh, good question. But I think initially what attracted me here was the program, the strong social connections, family. And so that kind of really called me to come over here. But more so my background, I got my undergrad in psychology with a minor in leadership studies. So I had that really focused on leadership. I was also involved all across campus as well. I was a resident assistant, orientation leader, peer mentor. Pretty much it was a job, excuse me, if it was a job on campus, I did it because I kind of like the idea of helping my community, serving as a mentor to my peers. So I enjoyed that a lot too. And that kind of really tied focus into what I want to do in my future is really helping students find their paths. While at UCF, I helped build a mentorship program that was really important to me, and helping students navigate college and how to also leverage their identity as leaders. So all their involvement effectively to get their careers in the future. So, if you're a resident assistant, it might not connect necessarily to being an engineer per se, but one of those transferable skills that you might be doing that you don't know that can also help you prepare you for your job later on. So that was largely what I was focused on. I have 5 siblings, so love the chaos of being in large groups, so having a large family. And I also, fun fact, I really enjoy playing Pokemon at this big age. So I play Pokemon all the time. It's very fun to me. So I think that's pretty much just the generic around me.
Cool. And so again, my name is Conor. Conor is fine. Dr. Conor also fine, but Conor is fine. I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Higher Education and Student Affairs. I teach in the leadership minor, and I also teach in the College Student Personnel Master's Program and the Higher Education Administration PhD program. This is my 3rd year at Bowling Green State, and before I was here, I was an adjunct faculty member at the University of San Diego, where I also got my doctorate in leadership studies. My undergrad degree is in philosophy, and I attended Cabrini College, which is a small liberal arts school right outside of Philadelphia. And I got my master's degree in organizational leadership with a focus on higher and post-secondary education at the Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City. And all of those things sort of all come together to sort of make the interesting mix of what got me interested in leadership. But for the purposes of this conversation, I had been thinking a lot about, the things that, what was relevant to sort of this notion of leading with you. And the thing that I was brought back to was the first student leadership opportunity that I had, which came about because I was walking through the student activities building at my undergraduate institution, because it was a very small school. There was a building that housed all of the activities. And I was walking past the office one evening, and the director of student activities stuck his head out of the window, or like the little sort of like glass divider, and said, "Hey, I like your scarf," because I was wearing like a orange and black striped like collegiate scarf. And he was like, "Those are the colors of the school that I went to," which, by the way, interestingly enough, was Bowling Green, because he got his master's from the CSP program that Darwins is in now. And I was like, "Oh, that's neat. Like, where did you go to school?" And we started talking for a second. And he was like, "I really like your style. I really think you should think about being an orientation leader." And it wasn't until later that what he saw in me was like an interesting creativity and a bunch of skills and possibilities. And he helped me to develop an understanding of those, and why being able to leverage those things was meaningful for working with other folks on campus, creating a sense of belonging within folks who were coming to the campus, and why he thought that that was really valuable for folks to interact with on their sort of first arrival to campus and getting oriented and connected to the campus community. He saw in me an opportunity to connect folks to the campus who might otherwise feel like, a campus that puts a lot of energy into its lacrosse program and is mostly dedicated to teacher education. Why there needed to be other folks represented and have sort of a point of connection for people who didn't necessarily want to come to school to play lacrosse and weren't necessarily training to be K through 12 teachers. And while I didn't know it at the time, that has been, a consistent part of my career and the future leadership opportunities that I took when I got involved in residence life, when I got involved in being a graduate assistant, when I was the student body president as a doctoral student for the institution where I got my doctorate, things like that. We were also wondering or hoping that folks could use the chat function to tell us a little bit more about the things that you're involved in on campus. What are some parts of who you are? What are some parts of your experience at BG? What are some of the things that sort of connect you to the BG community and that are sort of important parts of your experience since you've been here?
So I think one of the first things we can do when we're talking about leadership, and as you all kind of are discussing and like typing out what your involvements are, we kind of wanted to ask some questions for you all. And so the first question we thought of is, how does who we are help us practice leadership? And I think this is the first question we ask ourselves, and we wanted really to ask you to think about your identity as a person. So that could be, for me, a big part of my identity is, I have 5 siblings, like I said, I'm a big brother. And so like leadership and who I am, that kind of starts there first. And the fact that I always had to like look out for my little brother. I always had to like try to find ways to like serve as a role model to him. And that kind of transitions to me. Like, I don't know if we have any RAs in the room, resident assistants. When I established a culture on my floor, I established this such as that I'm everybody's big brother. And so my leadership kind of really started with that. So that's kind of, I think, for me, the initial part of my identity and how it connects to my leadership.
Mm. And when Darwins had originally posed this question to me as a part of our sort of work on building this presentation, one of the things that came to my mind was that for a very long time, and still, I'm an only child, and I grew up as an only child. I grew up sort of needing to figure things out for myself because I didn't necessarily have older siblings to be able to help sort of guide me through this. But I also didn't have a lot of practice collaborating with people because I didn't have younger siblings to sort of work with. And both of my parents worked, so I did a lot of taking care of myself. Then about 10 years ago, actually 11 years ago now, I got married. And I have been thinking a lot over the last few years about how being married to somebody and having now not being the only person who has to figure things out and not just making decisions that only affect me, but having to think about how these decisions affect another person has been a really fantastic leadership opportunity and has prompted me to really rethink a lot of what I had originally thought about leadership and learned about leadership from being an only child, from being a person who lived on my own, from being a person who, was the only person I had to make decisions for. So I've been rethinking a lot of my leadership over the last 10 years as I continue to learn as I continue to learn the skills that I did not learn growing up as an only child. And so, we also wanted to ask you all to share some of these things about yourself. So Mackenzie just posted, I'm involved in Falcon Leadership Institute along with Dance Alliance, and back home was on high school dance team, captain in the junior and senior year, built a lot of leadership experiences in my life, helped me grow as a person. Yeah, I think there's some really fantastic examples in there. And so with that, Mackenzie, could you say a little bit more about how your experiences on the dance team in high school sort of helped you grow as a person? Or could you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you learned about yourself through that experience, as other folks are sort of posting and things like that?
And if you're having a little trouble trying to figure out like what you want to type or start out with, I think you could just start with that question is, what's an important part of who you are, and maybe it's not necessarily centered in leadership yet. Just looking at you as a person, when you think about your identity, that could be family, it could be your religious views, it could be anything in which you identify with, gender, sexuality, anything that might be important to you. I think that can serve as a basis for your conversation at first. So just maybe start with that at first.
Absolutely. And, the rest of our presentation will do the work of sort of connecting those things to leadership. So it's okay. Like we're all and, part of leadership is that we're all still working on it. Leadership is a process. So yeah, just taking a moment to think about this question of what's an important part of who you are. Oh, and so Liam Harper just posted, I spent all 4 years of high school as student body president. Wow, that's phenomenal. And also in a leadership role in some performing arts groups, which I think contributed to me joining the undergraduate student government at BG, continuing to speak on behalf of my constituents. Yeah. That's a really phenomenal set of experiences. I also am sort of amazed at that. In your first year of high school, you were already sort of in the position and in the place to be able to do that. I think I barely knew which direction was up in my first year of high school.
Same.
And so Kayla had said, I haven't had any leadership opportunities except for when I was able to supervise lifeguards. That's a pretty phenomenal opportunity there. BG, I got involved in Greek life, always looking for new opportunities I can pursue before graduating so I can grow in my own chapter. I also feel like it's important part of who I am is being very empathetic. It's allowed me to be more open to people's views. And I also consider myself really open-minded, which allows me to see every aspect of an argument. Yeah, I think, well, one, I think, the opportunities that you've listed are some really fantastic opportunities to learn about leadership. And, it's less for us, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it's less about the quantity of experiences or, how many checks you have on a sheet, and more about whether or not they were opportunities that helped you to learn. And so whether it's one thing or 50 things, like the learning about leadership is more important than, having a 47-page resume
Right.
that lists all the things that you've done. And then Mackenzie just responded. So it's, I think it helped me develop a sense of self. I've always been a strong leader. So having this title was an honor to me, and it helped me realize things about myself I didn't know before. That's really important. We're gonna talk quite a bit more about that through the rest of the presentation. My dad has also been a big influence on my life when it comes to leadership, because he coached sports teams, and he was always encouraging me to be a leader and set an example, and also to be humbled by the honors that I received. It's I hadn't really realized it or thought as much about it. Darwins, I don't know if this had been clearer to you than it might have been to me, but it wasn't really until we started talking about this that it prompted me to think a whole lot about the leadership lessons that we learn from family, and how for a lot of folks, their family dynamics in one way or another is some of the first lessons that we learn about leadership, and some of what helps shape or guide, how we begin to understand leadership. And maybe for me, it's being an only child. It was sort of more self or internally directed.
I think that's a valid point, because even I look at Will's response, being involved with the Canary Crane Youth Theater and like the Model United Nations. A lot of these are things which you might not initially think about leadership. We don't see it as that. I think we get introduced formalized leadership when we get to our undergrad, right? And we start getting those experiences, like I said, the orientation leader, RA. But those experiences start much younger. It's about leading those groups. Even that, I think somebody here talked about being a leader of lifeguards. That is leadership, guiding your constituents and looking at your stakeholders and saying, this is what we need to follow. These are our policies we have in place. Here's where we need to go next. And even if you're not involved, I know some people here are not super involved in BG yet. Even like you said, like this person right here, Madison, was captain of numerous sports teams. And so that captain, you were a leader, people probably looking towards you for answers, for motivation. And so leadership really can be found anywhere. It's like I said, it's really within you and your practices, and it's not tied to the titles or how it's formalized more so, but in those experiences you're receiving, and they can translate to just about anywhere.
Absolutely. And so then, with a lot of what you all have shared, and some of this is already being answered in what you all are sharing, but we wanted to continue to have folks thinking about, now that you've sort of noticed some parts of who you are and you've gotten in touch with those things, to reflect a little bit more directly on how some of those things help you to practice leadership. So what were some of the lessons that you learned as you came to this understanding of yourself? And, the stuff that's going through in the chat right now is really great. And we really want to encourage this to be sort of an open stream that we'll continue to monitor and continue to sort of pull in what you all are saying into what we're presenting. We also wanted to talk a little bit about the theory behind leadership identity development, because we're sort of from the world of higher education and student affairs, where we talk a lot about how theory informs practice, and then practice informs theory. And so, well, that didn't work the way it was supposed to. So in the sort of model of leadership identity development, the first thing people do is develop awareness. They develop an awareness of themselves. They develop an awareness of leadership opportunities, and they develop an awareness of what practicing leadership can be. A lot of that involves internal sort of reflection. Who is it that I am? Asking yourself this question of, how I know myself, who am I, who do I think I am, and who do I want to be in the world. Also, then people explore. They realize that there's a big wide world out there, and that there are lots of opportunities for them to explore leadership and different ways of practicing leadership. This exploration also helps us develop further an understanding of our identities, of how we understand ourselves and how we understand who we are. And through that exploration and through that deeper understanding of who we are, more opportunities to practice leadership come into focus. So whether that's, realizing that we are members of multiple cultural groups, and that those cultural groups create then opportunities to put leadership into practice, not just by, as Darwins said a moment ago, not just by being the president or being a person with a high level of authority in these groups, but even just by showing up and playing a role and contributing our skills to the forward movement of this group's agenda, and doing work that aligns with our values is an important part of practicing leadership. And so as we come to understand who we are, we come to understand our group membership, we come to understand what that means for us as individual people, we can then we can also come to greater clarity about what opportunities there are to practice leadership. And finally, we develop a leadership identity. We understand who we are. I'm glad. I was really hoping that people were going to appreciate the Breath of the Wild reference. That's how I spent my last 2 summer vacations, running around Hyrule. And so finally, we develop a leadership identity, not as a solidified sort of thing that's like, now I am a leader. Unfortunately, there's no merit badge that you sew on your tweed blazer. There's no sort of like sign that you get to hold up, but it becomes a piece of who we are. We integrate it into all of the other things that we have come to know about ourselves. And we develop our own understanding of what leadership is and how we practice it, which then provides us with the opportunity to take on new opportunities, understand how to put our understanding of leadership into practice through taking on new responsibilities, new roles, and sometimes taking or coming to the realization that there are times where our practice of leadership is not what is needed. And so it doesn't always just mean running to the front to take on sort of the high visibility roles, but understanding how our leadership plays a role in developing support for other people to practice their leadership. And so while these things sort of focus on an upward trajectory and sort of lead folks to this process of development, it's also cyclical. So it doesn't just end where we develop a leadership identity and then we're good, we're set. But, as we understand development, it's a cycle. And so when we develop a leadership identity, that increases our capacity for greater awareness. And so we sort of return to re-examining, we return to developing our own awareness, which then prompts our ability to further explore. Like you've got your experience points, you've leveled up your HP, you've expanded your inventory, which means you can now climb those mountains that before you couldn't get up without falling off and needing to use the hang glider to save yourself from getting smushed. You can now fight the giant massive bokoblins, where before you kept having to start over and run away from them, which then in turn redevelops how we understand leadership identity, how we understand who we are, and further evolves our practice of leadership, so on and so on and so on. So it's a cycle that we continue to go throughout our lives. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about how we developed this sense of identity in ourselves. We talked a little bit about this in our introduction, but we also wanted to leave a little bit of space for us to reflect on that, and also for you all to reflect a little bit on what this might have looked like for you so far.
Right. And so when we're looking at like that kind of leadership identity model and how the whole process you go through it, I think we kind of just want to, again, model that for ourselves. And so I think that first piece is the awareness of who you are as a person. And so for me, like I said, that was really much being that big brother piece. And I think one of the first things I learned, if everybody here has siblings, especially like I have older siblings and younger ones, is that I had to be patient. And sometimes I think in leadership or just in life, especially my little brother, I would say things and like either he wouldn't get it or he wouldn't get it as quick as I wanted him to. And I found myself often getting like frustrated with him sometimes. And I think that's sometimes as a leader, you might be the person in the room who like might know the proverbial most, right? And because you're just the most knowledgeable in the room. And not that I was smarter than him, I just had more experience. I was older and I would tell him things and he wouldn't get it the first time. And so I remember growing up, as I started getting to leadership, one of the biggest things I think that was made me stand out was I was always patient. And because I was like, well, my brother's hard-headed. So I'm used to people not listening. I'm used to having to work with different people, different personalities, because me and my brother, while we're similar, we're also very different. And so that taught me a lot about I had to be aware of myself and my own flaws and also how I think, all right? And so that was that first piece. Then came that exploring piece, right? And so after that, it came down to trying to get involved and connected. Like I said, I became a resident assistant. I did orientation. And in those roles, I think what was really interesting is that I was always an opportunity where I was in a place where, again, I kind of knew more than anybody else because as an orientation leader, I've been at the school for a year. Resident assistant, I work with a lot of first-year students. So, of course, I've been at the school for a year. And so I was always constantly in a place to give advice and be patient. I would tell students the importance of going to class. Would they go? That's a different question. But I was still there to serve like that purpose of giving that insight. And then when things did go wrong, because, inevitably in college, sometimes they do, I was able to help them, guide them through that. And so really exploring leadership in different opportunities and trying to find different ways I can practice it. And then taking those skills and leveraging it in other places. I remember I ran for student body president at my school. Didn't work out how I thought it was going to, but nonetheless, a lot of my platform and a lot of what I think garner people towards me in the first place because they felt that very family-esque feeling from me, or that vibe. Like I was like the campus big brother, if you had a question, Darwins probably had an answer for it. And so we can kind of see that trend of, me as an identity, me being a big brother, sort of transcending and keep and moving on and how I lead and perceive myself, but also how people started to perceive me based on how I was acting. And that kind of became my identity. And so I became, like I said, that campus big brother. And then when I ran from Homecoming King, I won that one, thank goodness. That kind of was a large part of my platform as well. It was like, oh yeah, we know Darwins. Like Darwins is always holding us down. And so that kind of gave that a strong part of my identity. But then I think when you're kind of getting to that point, like the edge of that cycle per se, you kind of have to really go back and like think about what gushed in the first place. I kept asking myself, when I wanted to get votes, when I lost president, if I won Homecoming King, I went back to why are people believing in me in the first place? And that big thing was, again, that big brother, that mentor piece what really made me stand out to people. And so when I ran for president, I didn't necessarily practice that. And it wasn't in line with, I think, my identity, who I was. But when I went back to that, when I went back to just generally helping people and like, being there, supporting them, people kind of solidified that as my identity. And it was kind of always like we said, that circular cycle of who we are, our experience practicing them, and then like becoming an identity and also going back to that all times. I remember like my sister always say, you can't, I think she said something about like lemonade and like, oh, if you drink lemonade, some people drink the lemonade and forget the flavor, or they take Kool-Aid with that too. Like, don't forget where you come from. Essentially, is my whole thing is, recognizing that who you are as leader, whether you are applying for opportunities or whether all you are evolving your different levels on campus or off campus, going back to who you are as a person is really going to be the thing that's going to connect you to your constituents. And people are going to kind of see that and latch onto that a lot.
Yeah. And so when, again, sort of like as Darwins and I were talking about this and I was doing some reflection on it, one of the things that I sort of go back to is, like I grew up around my mom more than my dad. And my dad was around, but he worked a lot. And so, like my day-to-day interactions were a lot of with my mom. And my mom was a fixer and a mediator. My mom was the person in her family growing up who always like was working to solve the problems, was working to fix the problems, and was also mediating a lot of the conflict. And so, you know, growing up around her, having her as a role model, and she still is a role model to me to this day, she taught me a lot about how to fix people, and about how to fix problems. And sometimes I would realize very often that that was my go-to like effort to make a solution, was just like, let's fix the problem, let's squash the conflict, let's mediate it really, really quickly so that we can move on and get to it. And then when I started to, transition into, college, living life on my own, having my own relationships with people, I realized that that was actually what I was doing. I was always trying to fix the issues that everybody was facing. And when I was an RA, I was super sort of always trying to make sure that everybody was having a good time. When I was in orientation, I was trying to make sure that any sort of hiccups that people ran into, that I was there to sort of try and fix it for them. And I found myself getting really, really burnt out. I found that I was not able to be effective in sort of helping folks navigate their own experience, because I was investing so much of my time and so much of myself in trying to do it for them, rather than helping individual people build the tools to do it themselves. And so I had to really unlearn a lot of that like desire to fix everything for people, and sort of reorient myself to working with people to develop their own skills to fix the problems themselves. And I think that that really culminated in the time where I was elected the student body president for the college that I was at when I was getting my doctorate. I was the sort of student body president of the School of Leadership and Education Sciences. And over the course of the year, I did a lot of things. I made some changes to the position that I thought better reflected the program. I worked with a lot of folks in various other positions on the governing body to sort of make sure that their visions for the school and their visions for their positions could be more fully realized. And at the end of it, somebody was like, oh, we'd actually really like you to run for the graduate student body president of the whole university. And I was like, no. And part of that sort of decision to turn down that opportunity came out of a realization that I was able to better serve sort of my values, my interests, and better work with people when I wasn't the person in charge. I realized, or the person with the sort of high level of authority, that a lot of the skills that I had developed for myself were maybe better suited for being in collaboration with other people rather than being sort of the final decision maker. And so, coming to that realization that I didn't necessarily want to continue to pursue these top level administrative positions, that I didn't necessarily always want to be the final decision maker, allowed me to really rethink what things I was applying for, what opportunities I was pursuing. And it sort of meant that I didn't also have to feel bad about saying no to things that I knew were just going to be more stressful for me than they were going to be helpful and things like that. Would being the student body president of the entire university, or for all graduate students of the university, have opened some doors for me? Probably. It also probably would have opened some doors for me to opportunities that weren't actually going to serve me. And so, that's where I had developed this identity of leadership. I had developed my own understanding of leadership. And having that new sort of perspective on it helped develop in me an awareness of not just what I did want to do, but also what I didn't want to do anymore. And so it meant that I got to explore new things and was able to stop only going after things where it was like, oh, well, first you be a senator, then you be a president, then you be a president of something bigger, and then that leads to something bigger. And I was like, you know what, yeah, that's not for me. So it offered me a very different approach to an awareness of myself, a very different approach to exploring what opportunities I could take on, and ultimately helped me refine and revise even what my own sense of leadership was after I did some more sort of self-reflection and some more exploration. And so we wanted to maybe do some guided work with you all on how you might develop your own leadership identity over the rest of the time that you're here at BG, and also with some things that might help you continue to do this development as after BG.
So something we're kind of thinking about, and maybe you could, if you feel free sharing this in the chat, is what is a challenge you made it through successfully in college? We ask this question because we think a lot about like what helps you connect to your constituents. And I think ultimately we want you to identify your leadership identity because that's how you connect with people. And I think a lot of times when we get involved in leadership, we think a lot about, the titles we have and how we might hold that over people. But if we're getting at the root of that, what are some experiences or challenges you face of which that you navigated successfully in college? So I think for me, one of the things I came back from, and I think probably my biggest talking points, like any of my residents or students, was almost failing a class. Yeah, when I say almost failing class, I'm talking like we're at like 32%, 2 weeks left in the semester, like very much rough, hard times. And so I really struggled a lot. I think it was Chem 1. I used to be like a physical therapy major or whatever. It didn't work out, clearly. It wasn't for me. But at the time, I was just struggling on that class. And really what it came down to is I remember I wanted to talk to my professor, but I felt like it was too late. I was like, it's 2 weeks left. I probably should have said something earlier. But I just went. I went to office hours and I was kind of like, look, I'm not doing too hot. I know it's my fault. And I kind of had this honest and earnest conversation with my faculty member, and they helped me out, and like they kind of like let me make up some assignments. They like gave me like a study guide for our final coming up, and so I think about that a lot of times, and that's why I became a big advocate of talking to faculty in the first place, because I had the same ideas in my head, like it's too late, I want to bother somebody, and my biggest talk is straight is when I get stressed out, I avoid everything, so I'll just either sleep or not talk to anybody about it. And I remember I just had this like moment, I was like, I'm really paying to fail a class. Like I paid for this class, I'm paying tuition to fail it. And I kind of this moment where I was like, I need to solve something. And so I think that was a big challenge for me because I had to ask for help. I had to be vulnerable. And I had to think really critically about what I can do to like kind of get myself out of that hole. And so I think that was when I navigated successfully in college, because it was just kind of hard. Like I was on the verge of failing the class, and I had to really like tap into myself, my resources, and my identity, who I was as a person, to kind of figure out those issues. So like as you're thinking, just kind of use that as a basis of anything you wish you navigated that was hard, and like how, and also thinking about like what helped you through that challenge. Like, were there people you might have talked to? Were there resources you tapped into? What was your thought process? So kind of giving you that space.
Awesome. And then, so Will shared in the chat, that I haven't even made it through high school. So getting to the root of my development and my leadership potential will be helpful for getting me through that goal and attaining the skills necessary for a quality college experience. Absolutely, and the things that help you sort of navigate high school can be also a great jumping off point for how you navigate college and how you continue to develop and explore through the college experience, just continuing that cycle and continuing it with further and further expanded resources. And, for me, a challenge that I made it through successfully in college. So my parents had been basically like nudging me in the direction of being a lawyer pretty much my entire life. They were like, you're so good at arguing. You like to argue with people about everything. If somebody tells you the sky is blue, you'll fight them on it. You should be a lawyer. And it came down to getting ready to take the LSAT. And I started looking at the LSAT prep materials and just realized that I didn't want to do this. I did not have a passion for it. It was not inspiring me, and I was putting it off and avoiding it. And something clicked in me where I realized that I don't want to do this, and I can't force myself to do it because I don't want to. So what do I do? I'm most of the way through college. I have been like gearing my whole life towards this one goal, and I don't want to do it. And I'm gonna fail doing it because I don't want to do it. What do I do? And then much like Darwin's example, I went to my supervisor, who was the hall director when I was an RA. And I was just like, I don't want to do the thing I've spent my whole life telling myself I want to do. What can I do? What can I do? What should I do? And he said, well, you seem to like being an RA. And I said, yeah, this is a lot of fun. I feel like I put more energy into this than I put into getting ready to go to graduate school to try and be a lawyer. And he's like, well, like I do this for a living, right? Like I don't just hang out here for fun. Like this is my job. I get paid to do this. Do you think this is something you would want to do? And I was like, oh, I guess I never thought about the fact that this is a career. No one ever told me this was a job I could pursue, but could tell me about it. And he says, well, I went to graduate school and I have a master's degree in this thing, and you should look at some of these programs and they'll create some opportunities for you. And I explored and I explored and I explored, and I talked to other people who had also gone through these programs. And when I think about it now, I think, and this is a connection that I make to Darwin's story, I think part of what had helped me be able to find something that was going to be more sort of meaningful for me was that vulnerability, and was that sort of realization that one, I didn't want to do the thing I thought I wanted to do anymore. And that I was willing to say, like, I guess it's okay, but I need to ask for help now, that like, I can't do this all on my own. And that there are people here who want to see me be successful, even if it's not successful in the way that I had originally thought I was going to be successful, but they want to see me be successful. And so the last sort of question that we had was how each of you might also use this to help someone else through the same challenge.
I think for that question, as you're thinking about it, we'll touch on some responses in the chat. I think they're really, really good.
Yeah.
Is when you think about some of the challenges and the people which you connect with and you trust, like your support systems, those probably were some people who were vulnerable as well. And they kind of talked about their experience like we just kind of did. And so think about how you can guide somebody through that. I think when we're thinking about leadership and like your constituents and how you can assist them best as possible, those are people who are vulnerable with you, those people who are kind of talking about those experiences and how they also had a hard time. I think sometimes we sometimes could put leaders on pedestals and think that they have it all together. We definitely don't, like some people might view me as leader and I just kind of just existing, I think right now. And so I think that if we go in the chat, talking about Kayla's response of being far from home and like moving from their family. I did have the same thing as well. I lived in Florida and I went from Miami to Orlando. It's like a 3-4 hour drive. And so I had that same experience, super close to my family. And I was like, I knew nobody. I was like, I'm not going to have any friends. And I went about making friends by talking about the fact that I don't think I have friends here, or I'm scared to make friends. And that was like my main selling point, because I go on my phone, knock on my door, I'd be like, oh my gosh, hey, I'm new here. I have no friends. I want to meet more people. And then the person would be like, oh, same, and we go in the common room. And so kind of using that as a connecting point. And so think about some of your challenges of which you might have faced, if we're looking at what Mackenzie sent, it was like being hard, leaving home and like leaving everything, and people encourage you through your struggles. How can you be that for somebody else? How can you articulate that experience for somebody else? Because chances are, just look up right there, Kayla kind of went through the same thing. That's a connecting point to kind of connect you with your constituents or just other leaders in general.
Mm-hmm. And I copied what people did for me. I faked it until I made it. And I remembered that I had good examples. And so, I think for those of you who may not have, who may be thinking about like, what's it going to be like for me going off to college? I think Kayla had a great example, like just set the intention to just meet people. And it doesn't mean that you have to meet, the first 5 people you meet have to be your best friends for life, but you meet people, you learn sort of what works, what doesn't work. And even if you never see that person again, you still learned sort of how to have a conversation with them. You still put yourself out there enough. I, was really scared about moving to New York City. I had only maybe been there once or twice before in my life. I had never lived outside of like the Philadelphia area, and I didn't know anybody. And so one day my supervisor was like, hey, let's go to the movies, like, let's just hang out. And I didn't know how much I needed somebody who knew how to navigate the big city to just say like, hey, let's ride the subway. Like, let's figure it out. We're going to go to the movies. We're going to do this. And so I also, when I sort of got to new places and met new graduate students and met new sort of folks who were trying to figure out navigating a place that they didn't know, I was the one who was like, hey, let's go to the movies. Hey, let's ride the subway together. Like, let's just take a day and go do something that we could enjoy, as a way to help ease some of the discomfort about moving to a new place, about being in a new place, about not knowing anybody. And, give people an opportunity to feel a little bit at home in a place where they might be feeling homesick. When I moved to San Diego, California, I had never left the East Coast of the United States before in my life. I'd never seen California, and I just up and decided to move across the country, which was a terrifying thing, to move 3,000 miles away from everything that I was familiar with. And at the same time, there were people around there who were like, oh, you're new here? Like, cool, let's get you connected. Let's hang out. Let me show you where all the good taco spots are. Let me teach you how to ride the subway in California, which is very different from riding the subway in New York. Mostly because it doesn't go underground most of the time. And so, then after I had been there for a few years and I met some new people who moved there, it was my turn to sort of say, hey, let's ride the subway. Hey, let me tell you where the good taco spots are. Everybody's going to tell you to go to this place to get, good, whatever kind of food, but that place, the lines are really long. Let's go to this place where the food's better and there aren't as long of lines. Things like that. And so like I use the examples that folks have presented to me to then help make that happen for other people. And Kayla, again, in the chat saying, some of the people that I met by doing this, I don't even really hang out with on a regular basis, but we're in a lot of the same classes together. So when we're both struggling in a class, there's always both of us to have that connection, to ask each other the questions and help if we're scared to ask the teacher or the professor. And yeah, having that support network, knowing that even if you knowing that you are probably not the only person who's navigating this experience, and building connection across those experiences, especially in times of high stress and high anxiety, it's very easy to feel alone. It's very easy to feel isolated. And being able to reach out to create that connection can be a way to sort of remind ourselves that we're not actually alone in this. And in fact, like, the people around us are really, really important to helping us navigate it, and that we can then be that for another person. And part of how that connects to identity is because that gives us a lot of group membership to look around and see that we might have points of connection, that we're involved in a student organization that's around a part of our identity, whether it's, our racial or ethnic group, whether it's a social group that's based around like a common interest or a common major, whether it's about, building community around a religion or faith tradition. All of those things provide us with opportunities for points of connection where we can then say, or where we can then have the realization that, hey, I'm not alone in this. And so, we wanted to sort of leave the last we're originally thinking that we would do some reflection, and I think you all have been doing a really good job of covering this in the chat. So we really value that this has been an ongoing thing rather than a save it just until the end. We also had some suggestions around like getting connected and involved with the Marvin Center, or if you end up on a different campus, the different leadership spaces on the campus that you end up at, connecting with faculty in your majors and minors, and looking for volunteer opportunities in the community. Those opportunities are not all just contained within the campus, but the greater community that can build that bridge between the campus and the community.
And lastly, we just wanted to stay connected with you all. Like leadership learning and practicing leadership, it's an ongoing learning process. Conor has a PhD and he's still learning how to practice leadership. So it's a lifetime development skill. And so if you have any questions about that, especially if you want to figure out how to unpack your experiences so it can leverage you to another position or different areas of leadership, feel free to reach out to us. Both of our emails are there. We're both for student affairs, so we're here for students, of course. So like our entire job is to help you. And so if you're kind of looking at that, looking for finding more ways to get involved, certain senses of mentorship, we're here to support you. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out. And also just thank you all for participating in the chat because I was scared I wasn't going to talk the entire time. So I really, really appreciate it. If we had like the group chat with the virtual thing, that would have been different. But thank you all for participating so much. Just want to make a side note.
Yeah. I want to echo Darwin's comment. Thank you so much. We really appreciate, your willingness to share, your willingness to show up with some vulnerability in a sort of maybe kind of awkward like group text thing where you might not know everybody. You all still showed up and really like did the good work of leadership that we were hoping to have folks do. So thank you for teaching us. Thank you for role modeling really good leadership work. And thank you for being in the work with us. We really appreciate it. And I know I can speak for both of us to say that it has definitely made our Saturday morning a lot more fun and enjoyable. So we appreciate you all.
Stop, don't gas us.
Now I really don't know what to do now that it's like over.
Great work, you two. That was a really good presentation. I'm glad that I chose this one. So you all are more than welcome to join the alumni panel after this if you would like. Otherwise, you're good to go. But I am going to sign off and start that session panel. But yeah, great work. I'll talk to you both later.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Harry.
No problem. Thanks for doing it.
And Darwins, thanks for reaching out to me about this. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you sending that email. So
I know, it was so much fun. I definitely kicked this Ryan kid out. I think he's had us on the entire time. No, Ryan, the last person that was sitting there, I just kind of kicked him out because I figured they might have just had their computer on listening to us talk, which is fine. But oh yeah, no, this was so much fun. I was really shocked they participated. Just let me see if I can save chat just so I can see what any type of scandal happened in here. Where's that?